Hello, and welcome back to Rejuvenated Women, Impeccable Health for High-Performing Women. And I'm really excited to be joined today by Kimberly Smith, who is a resilience and life transition coach. And what Kimberly does is help people build long-term resilience mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and not live life disconnected from ourselves and what we want, but really focused on those things as we transition. So Kimberly, welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, I love to get started, just learning a little bit more about you and how you got into doing what it is you do. And then we're going to go from there. But just tell
Sure.
us a little about you.
Sounds great. Yeah, my background professionally, Alex, is just that I used to be in recruiting and staffing. So I spent 10 years in corporate talent acquisition and recruiting and staffing for various industries. Started on the oil and gas side, then moved into like chemicals, engineering, and hospitality. So you name it, I've done it in the recruiting sector. So I've always been guiding people and helping them transition within their careers. But, I came to a point in my career where I was really just hungry for more. And I didn't know how to pivot. I was trying to look at what I love to do. And I actually heard about life coaching on a podcast. And that kind of got me thinking. And I was like, all right, like, let me learn more about this. Right. And researched it more. I was able to identify a program that I loved, and I actually sat on it for at least a year and a half, almost 2 years. And it was one of those things that just like would not go away. It just kept tugging at me to give it, time and attention. And, it felt like I was being literally called to do it. And yeah, I just pulled the trigger and dove in head first. So as far as resiliency goes, I chose this area because, I myself went through a really, really rough patch when I was working in corporate America, when I was, newly married, bought our first house, became a mother, like all of these intense life changes and transitions really came at me full force. And for somebody who considered herself to be pretty well put together and organized, it shook me, and I found myself in this place of being disorganized, overwhelmed by my to-do lists. I was procrastinating endlessly on everything, and I was burnt out. I was emotionally burnt out, mentally burnt out, and I just really wasn't satisfied with where I had landed in life. And really not knowing where to start in terms of getting some of that strength back, some of that courage back to really go after what I wanted. And so I see a lot of people that are in the same predicament, right? They've worked so hard. They've followed the roadmap to quote unquote success and happiness, and kind of are left with this empty feeling like, well, what now? What next?
Absolutely. I can relate, and I know so many of our listeners can. My little of my backstory was I built this huge 7-figure chiropractic wellness clinic and office, and I bought and remodeled this building, and it was like, in 5 years we doubled in business revenue every year, and like it was awesome and
Wow.
major growth. But I hit the pinnacle of that buying this building, and I just walked upstairs one day and I was like, this is not what I imagined or what I want or the dream. And like, oh crap, now what? So, I think this is a really timely conversation, just given, what the last year and a half has been for a lot of people. There's been a lot of transition, whether it's career wise, health wise, like maybe being home stuck in front of Zoom all the time has given you insight into like, I want to do more of this. I don't want to do more of this. So I'd love to, dig into that conversation where we really deal with like finding our courage to really make a big significant change and like take that next step in terms of what life's going to look like, because it can be scary and it can be daunting, but
So
it's all,
scary, so
yeah,
daunting to step outside our comfort zone. And
huge.
that's what we work towards. We build up this comfortable life, right? And what we think is really going to bring us all the joy that we've been seeking. And then, yeah, like you said, we kind of look around and we're like, wait a second, this is not the dream. This is not what I envisioned. Um, and yeah, over the last year, I think everybody has kind of had a reckoning of some sort, right? Having to reckon with their careers or their health or their family and just the isolation. And, what do you do with all this time now? You have all of this time, but still there's never enough time, right? Like there's all of these weird feelings attached to where we are in this time and space right now. So yeah, resiliency is a factor. And resiliency to me is, I think, the ability to be courageous time and time again, right? Courage is strength in the face of pain or grief. And resiliency is the ability to use courage as a tool over and over and over again. It's like constant courage in your life, right? Constantly, moving through the fear, moving through the anxiety that we might feel about new situations or a transition or a change in our life or our family. So yeah, I mean, courage and resiliency absolutely go together, but if you can move through the pain and really use courage as a tool, then there's all these amazing gifts on the other side for sure.
That's huge. And I think it's like, if you'll go here with me, I love this concept of, so many, and I was talking about this on another episode recently. So many of us, we can get this victim mentality. So, and especially when circumstances aren't ideal, like COVID or, whatever it is. And so many of the women I work with who listen to the show, I know have been through big stuff, like losing family members or just, really feeling depressed and isolated, not having friendships, not having outlets and resources they normally do. And what I love about what you said is, courage, using it as a tool. So not being in that victim mentality, but tapping into resilience and courage and, the stuff we're talking about as a tool in your toolbox to help you get through whatever the crap is that life throws at us, right? And like I've talked about my own crap on the show, and I'm sure, we all have our own story, but like what helps us really grow and be healthy and well and going through these transitions is tapping into these tools that we're talking about. So for those who are listening to this and like, I'm totally in that victim place, how do I start? Where should they start? Like starting to cultivate this resilience?
Yeah. I think that, it's easy to fall into that victim mentality, right? When we feel like we're constantly being knocked down, we're being bombarded by all of these things that want our time and attention. And, where do we go from there, right? We do. It's very defeating. And so we want to kind of cry about it. Right? Like we want to feel sorry
and
for
maybe
ourselves.
like we need to make space to feel the emotions.
Yeah.
But
well, that absolutely for
yeah.
sure. And I'm a huge advocate for like crying your eyes out and feeling the feelings and letting them move through you versus, stuffing them down into, a suitcase and putting them under the bed somewhere, right? Because they will come back to haunt you. But so feeling the feelings, absolutely. But, I like to give myself a time limit, right? Of how long I kind of get down on myself, like if I need a day or an afternoon or a few hours or whatever it is. But I know that I have this life waiting for me, right? So I can't completely crumble, right? I need to be able to come back and get back in action quickly. But feeling the feelings is a great step. Self-compassion, right? Like you can have self-compassion for yourself and what you're going through, but not play the victim, right? Not find reasons to blame other people or other things, but really try and find some compassion for yourself and then acceptance, right? Like the truth of the matter is like, we just have limited control in this, in this world we're in, right? Like we only control our own behavior, but so often we think that we're able to control people or control situational outcomes. And, I think that we oftentimes set ourselves up for a lot of these disappointments because we don't manage our expectations and we are so attached to a specific thing that we want to happen in a certain way. And we focus all of our energy on that. And then, when it doesn't transpire, we are kind of crushed, right? We're derailed from everything else that might be going on in our world.
Absolutely. I've been, and we can just go into this as much as you're comfortable, but I've been reading a lot on, how we actually cultivate change in ourselves lately. And, so much of it is about the mind. Like the last year I've been working on a PhD and that's based in quantum physics and integrative health. But, quantum physics is this thing that, like explains the unexplainable, right? And really gets outside of ourselves, but into this realm of like where possibility comes from, where, real change can come from. And lately I've been reading a book by Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he's very much in that realm. But, it's
Yep.
about a mind shift ultimately. And we have to be willing to like let go of our attachment to something having to look a certain way in order to actually have it become to fruition. A lot of times, like you have to be willing to, you can have the idea of what you want it to look like, but it might look differently to get there. Hopefully that makes sense.
No, it really, really does. And I could totally geek out on the quantum physics and all of that. Like I too have, gone down the rabbit hole of, how we change our mind, right? Like most people aren't aware that, we can change the structure of our brain, right? Like their neuroplasticity is real. And so it's not made up. Like you can, but by the thoughts that you think, you carve new pathways in your brain, it changes the actual shape, the structure. I think that just knowing that was huge for me, right? Because then I could accept the things that I didn't have control over. Your mindset, you can totally control, right? That's something we're in there every day, all day, thinking our thoughts. We can change our perspective. We can change the thoughts that we think. We can choose to see things in a different way. And that, and with the whole quantum physics and energy, energy itself, is something that I've paid a lot of attention to, right? When you're in certain situations and you feel like, like this is going to swallow me whole. And I kind of subscribe to three things, which are like faith, energy, and inspired action, right? When you're in those tough situations, knowing that we only have a certain amount of control and like having some faith in whatever higher power you may believe in, right? Takes that burden off of you, right? Like you are not meant to bear that burden.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then on the energy side, just what's the feeling that you get from whatever it is that's happening, right? Do you need to process those emotions and let that energy kind of dissipate through you, right? And what's the inspired action that you can then take, right? Do you need to have a rest day? Do you need to go for a run and burn out some of that anxious energy, right? Do you need to finally pull the trigger on that e-learning course that you've been thinking about and has been nagging at your subconscious? What's going to make you feel better? And really learning how to meet our own needs is kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, no, that's huge. And it's so, I meet so many women who were stuck, or like a lot of the women I end up working with are either entrepreneurs already or, have the idea for the business, but they're stuck in the professorship or, the corporate job or whatever, and they just can't get out of it. And so I love that idea of, taking inspired action, like process it, but then do something. Like we have to be willing to actually take the steps forward to do something with that.
Yeah, definitely. And it takes humility, right? I mean, and I think that that's a tough pill to swallow sometimes, right? Is to admit that like we don't know everything. I think growing up, at least I was fed the notion that when you get to adulthood, you'll figure it all, like you'll have it all figured out. Like the answers will just be there, life will be easy, right? And that's so not true, right? And also maybe looking up at to our parents or the generation before us, like my stepdad worked at GE for 30 years, right? So he had one job, he had one career. Now you see people having anywhere between 3 and 5, sometimes even more career shifts in their lifetime, right? So we're at a completely different point. We're at a totally different place. And we're using all of these outdated thought processes to kind of make sense of where we're at, which, of course, there's going to be conflict there.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually hadn't really thought about that in terms of, the career shift. And
Mm-hmm.
I've gone through that myself in the last like 3 to 4 years. I originally have been a chiropractor. I still practice really part-time, but
Mm-hmm.
my body fell apart. I had 6 tears in my wrist after 6 years of practice and had to have surgery 2 years ago. And so it became a necessary career shift where, I do coaching now and functional medicine, but I haven't really thought. I think we very much still as a society are like, well, you have the one thing, like the thing you went to school for, is what you're gonna do for the rest of your life. But we change.
Yeah.
And so I love that idea, we shift and change. And
Well, and also we don't have to do it alone. Like you coach your clients. Like I discovered the beauty of coaching myself. I'm also a huge advocate for therapy. That's
Yeah,
where my
and then
journey started. Let's be honest, right? Like
yep.
I found myself in a therapist's office and she was like, "Why are we here?" And I was like, "Well, frankly, I'm messing up and my life sucks. So let's dive in,
Talk
right?"
about it.
But yeah, I mean, and of course, coaching and therapy are different, but there's
Yeah.
beautiful gifts to each. And I think just, yeah, knowing your resources, knowing that you don't have to do it alone, being willing to try something different and use whatever tools may help you get to a better place, right? Or find some new grounding. Um, also just accepting constant change, right? Like that is something that I've keep reminding myself of every month, every year, that nothing really ever stays the same.
Yeah.
So enjoy just these beautiful shifts, right?
Yeah. And really embrace them. Like, we can be so resistant to change. That can be
Yes.
so scary and like, I don't like this, but there's so much beauty on the other side. That's especially with my entrepreneurial stuff. Like anyone I hired, I was like, look, things changed here literally overnight. There's a reason why our revenue doubles every year or more. And like, you just have to hold on to your seat and fly with it. And I've approached life like that. And to an extent, we can like even that out some, but
Right.
we have to be willing to just go along for the ride and enjoy every minute of it because there's things to be learned, even if it's
Yeah.
crap.
When we're trying to control everything, when we're trying to resist things, like you said, you were pushed into a different career, right? Like
Yeah,
physically, you could not do your job any longer.
yeah.
So, I mean, that must have been so difficult to deal with, but it was such a, you know, divine push. Like this is not you need to go this way now, right? Um, and that can be really hard to accept, right? But
It can, and I don't think either one of us are saying any of this is easy, right?
no, oh, definitely
It
no. It's
it
hard as
takes work.
hell.
It takes grief. Like I had to like let go of an entire side of my identity that I think I didn't complete really until this last year. Like, and it's been several years that I've been making this shift, but not willing to jump 100% in. And when we finally are willing to like just jump off the cliff, stop like hanging onto the edge or clawing your way back up, there's a lot of freedom and just I think acceleration that happens on the other side of making that big leap.
Absolutely. And that's really where you do see a whole new life come into form, right? I mean, and that transition doesn't happen overnight, certainly, right? And you know, you have to, like you said, say goodbye to the old, right? Let the old fall away. That's kind of how I imagine it or visualize it, is just like the old life is falling away, the old job, like whatever it is, the relationship. Um, and then something new is you're making space for something new.
Yeah.
Like you're clearing it out. And then, but there is that period where you're kind of in this void and it's really uncomfortable, right? Where like the old is gone, the new hasn't fully formed yet. And you're freaking out. Like, what am I doing? But, and that's where patience comes into play, right? So it's just
Right.
always
Which
being
is great.
tested.
Yeah. No, we really are. So for those that like maybe they're in that void right now and listening to this, like, I don't know what I'm doing. What guidance do you have around either transitioning your mindset? Because I think that's huge, like changing your self-talk and just, a lot of the things I've been reading is like we have to be able to look at who we're being and embrace a new being and like step into who we need to be the thing that, to get wherever we're trying to get, whether it's lose the weight or, change the career, start the business, whatever it is. So what tips or tricks do you have for just starting on that process?
Yeah. This is such a great question. So, first and foremost, critical awareness is something that I really work on with my clients. And what I mean by that is really just looking around and reality checking the messages that you're getting from your surroundings, from your environment, from maybe your culture, maybe your family, right? Like staying present, staying grounded, and really kind of pulling apart, like, what does this mean for me, right? Being aware of your surroundings, what things are shifting in which direction, right? And having some radical honesty with yourself, right? Like oftentimes when we are trying to lose the weight or we're trying to get into a new job, like, or whatever it is, we tell ourselves, like, again, we go into that victim mentality where it's, well, I've done everything and nothing has worked.
Right.
But is that really true? Right. Again, like that's where we have to be honest with ourselves, right? Like when, especially when it comes to, I mean, and I've struggled with my weight, and weight loss, right? Where I'm like, man, I'm really doing everything. I'm cutting carbs. And I'm like, well, am I? I am kind of cheating here, cheating there. I'm not following the rules here, right? So yeah, critical awareness, radical self-honesty, right? And then also, what are your tools? Like, what are the resources that you currently have available to you? Oftentimes I think we don't see all of the resources that are actually right in front of us. And we also, like we said earlier, we expect this to come easy. We expect it to not be hard. We expect that it's going to be comfortable
and then it'll happen quickly,
like
overnight.
that. Yeah. We have all of these really, like those expectations are just not, they're not in line with what is actually true for these scenarios, right? It's going to be hard. It's going to take work. It's going to take you pushing yourself. It's going to be certainly uncomfortable. It may be very stressful. It may be overwhelming at times, right? But on that journey, right, you're going to see a lot of wonderful changes in yourself. You're going to tap into new layers of who you are. So yeah, I think that's where I would tell people to start. And also just to have compassion for yourself, right? And talk to yourself kindly. That inner voice, you spend all day with it, right? So it can be your best friend or it can be your worst enemy. And we really make that choice.
Absolutely. My child is interrupting our discussion. We'll edit a little bit of that out. No, I agree wholeheartedly with all of that. And, just to add, like when I've seen women really embrace this and like take the time to journal, to deal with themselves and get through the muck. And, with a lot of the women I work with, there's maybe unresolved stuff from the past, like trauma they went through that they just have never thought to deal with. And in our process, we're cleaning out the body and stuff. And suddenly it's like, oh, it's time to do this, So when stuff comes up, like, don't shy away from going to work on it, because ultimately, all of this stuff is going to lead you to better health, to energy, to having the life that you want and love, to, these are the keys that get you there. It's not the magical diet or supplement or, order of things. It's messy, but I think it's Dean Grazioso always says, we have to, or it might have been Trent Shelton, another guy I follow, but they talk about, we have to fall in love with the present moment.
Yes,
is what ultimately gets us to where we want to go. And you have to love the journey, because that's your story.
For sure. Yes, I love that. And that's something that I've said to myself, and I think my therapist has said to me too, that like, because we want to rush everything, right? We're so eager.
Yeah.
And, she's like, what about just like embracing where you are right now on this journey, right? So I had a divorce in 2020. My divorce was final on March 13th. So like 2 days before we went into lockdown and quarantine. And that had been a long time coming. That was part of a big transitional phase in my life. And so many times I wanted to rush through that, right?
Yeah.
But honestly, like even that tough situation, right, wasn't as tough as it could have been, because I chose to see things differently. I chose to see the good in my ex-partner, right? I chose to really put my ego aside and focus on the co-parenting aspect of it, right? Like, so, we can choose to do things differently, see from a different perspective, and just be open to be shown the way, right? Like if we're just open enough, like we will find the right solution. It will present itself to us.
It will. And we have to be willing to wait for it too.
Absolutely.
I went through divorce in 2016 and 17. And
okay.
And I know many people, it's unfortunately, half our population is going through divorce. So I think that's a valid conversation, but you can go through it powerfully and in a way that you come out better on the other side. And open, like I'm remarried now very happily. We have an incredible relationship after we both came out of really toxic marriages.
That's
And
awesome.
and so it's like I get to experience that now, but I had to go through some really hard stuff to get there. And same for you.
Yeah, the reckoning for that is huge, right? Because, and the
Yeah.
resistance, right? Like you have this reckoning that like, wow, this is actually something that I think I need to do, right? And in my case, I was like, oh yeah, like I had a super aha moment where I was like, I know that I have to do this, as much as I had been resisting it, right? Because nobody wants to get a divorce, right?
No,
I
it's not why
mean,
we get married.
no, no, that wasn't part of the plan. That was absolutely not part of the plan. But friendly reminder, we're not in control of the plan. Yeah, it's you have this reckoning and then you resist it, right? And then you have the reckoning again, right? And there's all types of emotions wrapped up in that. But when you reach that acceptance, when you can forgive the past, when you can forgive yourself, right? You can undo some of those stories of, guilt and shame that, we've wrapped around ourselves. I feel more myself now than I have in a long time, right?
Yeah.
Choosing to leave that relationship was actually the key to a brighter future for me.
Yeah.
It really was. And it sounds like it was in your case too.
Yeah, absolutely. My ex struggled with alcoholism, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty dark, and you can really
Yeah,
only be as healthy as the least healthy person in your relationship. So
for sure.
the an experience, we will say.
I can
And
only
I've talked
imagine.
quite a bit about it on the show actually, but I think I had a thought, and it'll come back to me just based on what you just said. But yeah, it's a lot of times the hard stuff that we go through is necessary to get to who we really are, and find, like, rediscover ourselves. I feel like so many people, women I talk to in particular, because this is all geared at women, we've lost sight of ourselves because we've been taking care of everybody else, or engrossed in the career and just like not focused here at all. We don't look inside at ourselves, and one day you wake up and you're like, I'm overweight, my hormones are a mess, I feel like
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any energy, I'm like 80,
Preach.
you know, not even 40 yet. Like, what happened?
Nobody told me about this. Nobody told me this was going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but it's a journey. And I think it was the idea of forgiveness and acceptance, like so much, and so many of the health issues that I see with women, it actually comes back to that
Mm.
emotional stuff where we haven't really dealt with actually letting things go. And forgiveness isn't about the other person. Like, I struggled with this with my ex-husband, because I'm like, you did all this stuff and I'm mad about it, right? And I feel violent.
Right. Yeah.
And I really had to work through a process of like coming to acceptance, and accepting him as as he is. I chose him as the father of my child. Like, I choose to honor him in that relationship, and really just focus on good there, even though we weren't good. But getting to
Yeah,
that point, when you hang on to that stuff, you end up with cancer, or
for
huge health
sure.
issues. So
I absolutely believe that emotions are trapped inside the body. And in fact, like throughout some of these tough transitions, I've had ailments, right? Like I consider myself a really healthy person. I don't get sick a lot, like all that stuff. But, um, I've, during some of those big leaps, I like twisted my back out or hurt my hip, right? And, I've heard other people say, they're like, oh, well, that is literally your foundation, right? I don't know a lot
yeah,
about the chakras, but it's like
yeah,
an indication that something is really wrong in your stability, and you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, like all this stuff, and it's manifesting in your body. I absolutely think that's true. Stress for sure, causes those internal ailments and can lead to, some really scary things. So it's important to manage up front.
yeah. And doing what we're talking about here is like the key. For me, it was, I developed thyroid issues, and I'd spent my marriage not speaking and not
Mm,
sharing my emotion, and that's all tied to that. If we're getting into chakras, that, and that's, a chakra is just like a place where your body has energy. And so
right.
that's all tied to my throat. And once I was able to just communicate with myself again, and like actually voice my opinions, and all that started to heal itself. And
Yeah, absolutely. Isn't that interesting, right?
yeah,
I mean, That just blows my mind, but it's not a coincidence. I don't believe it to be.
No, not at all. Not at all. So this is great conversation. Like,
It
where
really
do
is. I
we go
know.
from here? All right. So just let's recap and we'll see where else we need to go. We've got building resilience as a tool and, your courage to do things differently. And in this time that we're living in, we don't have control over a lot. I think I always say control is a figment of the imagination anyways, but you like to pretend.
Right.
But really nothing's in our control. If you can wrap your head around that, you're in good shape. But we're cultivating this, we're improving our self-talk, we're accepting where we're at and going through the emotions, allowing, grieving and healing. A lot of what you've been talking about are the stages of grief,
Mm-hmm.
anger and acceptance, and we get depressed and disinterested, and eventually we get to we're good. Life is good again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, and you brought up a good point, and I never thought about it before, but I think that there are quite a lot of similarities between grief, right? The process of grief and also resilience. And there's a lot of grief in resilience, right? There's a lot of coping with grief in resilience. So that's an interesting thought. I mean, and those are things that we just can't avoid in life, right? But I think it's helpful to know that we don't have to do it alone, that resilience is indeed a muscle that we can exercise, that we can build, that we can, stockpile for when we really need it, right? And then we can dip in and have that as a resource, have that as a tool, and set ourselves up for success. We may not be able to kind of guarantee everything that's going to happen. And, I think that's just part of the beautiful adventure of life, is that we don't know what's going to happen, right? But yeah, having that the resilient mindset, that's definitely a tool for success in my book.
I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. So where can people connect with you if they're like, I need more Kimberly?
Yeah, sure. So I do a lot on Instagram. My handle is at Kimberly.Brooke, BROOKE.Smith. And also, head over to my website. It's encompasscoachingservices.com. So ENCOMPASS coachingservices.com. And, if you're trying to find just some modern tools for everyday resilience, I've got a really great freebie that people can grab. It's my free ebook called The Gift of Calm. And those are my favorite tools to really help bring me down in the moment, to help me just, cultivate calm and regulate my nervous system and all that good stuff. So I definitely recommend you grab it there.
Awesome. And I'll put links to all of that in the show notes.
Perfect.
Well, thank you. I loved this conversation, and hopefully all of the listeners did too.
Me too. Yes. No, this has been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.